So, my main topic I'm going to get into is I want to ask you the question, when is vintage worth it?
Vintage what?
Vintage anything. When is a vintage piece of equipment worth it? So, if you look at a Fender Princeton today, a reissue, it is, oh gosh, it makes me sick to think about. But it's in the ballpark. Let's say even if you're looking at used, you can find a used one for like $1,100, a little bit over $1,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where is that vintage Princeton worth it? Like, maybe that's not a good example because it's a vintage Princeton's probably like $3,000 to $4,000 at this point. But a Princeton non-reverb, a vintage one, is about $2,000.
Okay.
Okay. If you got a Princeton hand wired from Fender right now, brand new, I think they're $2,200.
Yeah.
So it's $200 more than an actual vintage Princeton, and not the one with reverb.
Right.
But still, and then you start looking at some of these other guitars. If you look like at a LG2 from Gibson, like that acoustic, like a used one or a new one today is like, I'm trying to think what they're going for now. Somewhere in the ballpark of $2,000, right?
I don't know.
I think so. And if you got a used one, a vintage one, you can find them in the ballpark of like $3,000 to $4,000 sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's some things that vintage kind of makes sense for you to get. It almost seems like compared to some things. But where's your line on that? Where do you think, like, is there something out there that you really think like, oh, it's worth going vintage for that? Or no, you should just stay with the standard like normal production stuff today?
I think what it all comes down to for me is how I'm going to use the equipment.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm taking it out places and I'm going to like take it to shows or whatever the case may be. I mean, this is a channel for the general type of guitar player, right? Joe Schmo down the street.
Yep.
Like, I'm not going to be taking, let's say it's a 68 Junior out playing places. Like, I'm going to want to keep it even as a piece and maybe just play it at home or something like that. If this is like, let's say you get something real dirt cheap.
Yep.
Say you get something for $1,000. It's a vintage piece of equipment. You plan to take it out.
Yep.
You know, I say you obviously go for that. I mean, if you find a heck of a deal, go for it. But I think it all just comes down to how you're going to use it. Because, I mean, think of my 66 Bassman.
Yeah.
Like, was it a great price point? No. Was it close to, you know, something I could have got that was newer today? For sure. But I'm only going to play it at home anyways because that wattage is crazy high.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I knew I wasn't going to take it out. So it was worth it because that was the sound in my head.
Yeah.
But when you're playing something out a lot, I don't know. I just feel like you really got to take that into account.
Yeah, I think you do. But even if you're not taking it out, like, there's some things that doesn't make any sense, right? Like a 59 Les Paul. Like, it's, in my head, for me, average player, right? It's never going to make sense to go vintage. I'm never going to buy a 59 Les Paul.
No.
I wouldn't, personally, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But I start thinking about like Princeton's, or I start thinking about some old Voxes, or I start thinking about old Gibson acoustics. Or
what about Gibson Juniors? I mean, a custom shop is like $4,000.
Yep.
Or you can get a vintage one for about $6,000 or $7,000.
Yeah. Like, where's that point of, is that vintage worth it? That's pretty close to worth it to me.
Unless you're going to beat the crap out of that custom shop.
Right.
I mean, it just depends on what you're using it for.
Yeah, and it depends where your price range is for something. But yeah, I really start looking at that, and I start considering, is vintage worth it for this? A deluxe Memory Man? Is that worth it to you?
$800? No, because I'm going to be fixing it every chance, you know, that it breaks down.
Right.
I'm going to have to fix it all the time.
Its problem is reliability.
Yeah.
Your biggest concern with it is the reliability of the vintage.
Right. And durability.
And for some things, I feel that way about if I'm going to be using it and taking it out and gigging with it all the time.
Like, I really don't want to mess with an Echoplex. I'll be tweaking it the whole time. I'll be trying to fix it instead of playing guitar.
Yeah.
I don't need that.
Right. Yeah, but there is some things that vintage, to me, makes sense.
I get it.
I was looking the other day and there was like a 00018 from 60s.
Is it triple O or triple aught?
Oh, here we go. Again, 000 or triple aught? 000?
That's it. It's 000.
000-18.
All right.
No, hold on. I'm not even done with my thing.
You're boring me. Come on.
Okay, so it was selling, it was like a late 60s model, which is not super desirable, right? It's not like the craziest desirable, like early 40s Martins. But 000-18 from Martin, and it was like $6,000. It had a neck reset, which they all need at that point, right?
Sure.
But other than that, it was all original. $6,000. I mean, if you get a custom shop Martin, it's $6,000.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same price. That vintage is worth it to me.
If it's the same exact price, I get it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a given, I feel like.
That's a given.
It's totally situational.
It's hard. It's
Totally
hard to answer that
situational.
question.
And like, what's important to you and me is not important to somebody else.
Yeah, I feel like amps are hard to do some of that stuff with because most of them are like way different. If you look at vintage Voxes, they're way more expensive. You look at vintage Marshalls like Plexis, they're way more expensive than their newer counterparts. But some of those acoustics, some of those electrics are pretty close.
Not bad.
Are pretty close. We need to